Next thing we're going to work on is getting the pipe gaskets replaced on this bike. When I purchased this bike, we noticed there was some premix coming out of the head pipe. And the way most of these two-strokes are set up is they have two rubber O-rings on the pipe, and that will slip into the head, and then it's secured with two springs. So over time, those O-rings can wear out or tear, and also the springs get weaker from the heat and vibration. So you'll end up with some premix leaking out. So these are very inexpensive parts, the O-rings and spring kit, it's just a few dollars. So it's a good thing to change, and it'll help keep the bike cleaner and keep the exhaust flowing through the actual pipe. So the first thing we're doing with this is taking off the silencer. And we're not doing anything to the silencer, but we just need to remove that to make it easier to pop off the actual pipe. And the silencer is just two bolts in the back of the bike. Should be an 8mm bolt and a 10mm nut on the back. And then you just wiggle it out from the pipe. All that holds these together is a rubber seal.
Should be fine there.
There should be some springs that go into those grooves on the seal. I mean, they're not on this bike. We should pick some up eventually, but we're not getting much leakage there, so it's not a big deal. Next thing, there's two rubber mounts that hold the pipe to the frame. First one's up here underneath the gas tank, just a 10mm bolt. And the second one is down below by the water pump, and that's a 10mm nut. And now you see the pipe is wiggling pretty easily. And the next step is just to pull off the springs, the two springs that hold the pipe to the head. There's some special tools available to do this. We like to do this with a small set of vice grips. We just clamp onto the end of the spring, and that gives us a really good grip to pull it and keep it from flying off. So that's the top one. Then we'll get on the bottom, pull that off. And there it is, pretty simple. So now the pipe should be free. Only thing, we might need to loosen the lower rubber mounts a little bit more to make some room. So we're just gonna loosen the 10mm bolts, the second bolt on the lower mount, and that'll help loosen things up a little bit more with the pipe. And now it should come off pretty easily. So there we go. Pipe comes right out. And we can inspect the O-rings. They don't look too bad actually, but over time these things can shrink a little bit, tear a little bit, and then you get a small exhaust leak. So it's good to replace really cheap insurance. And before we pop those new ones in, we're just going to clean out the exhaust port on the head. And you can even inspect the piston skirt, look inside the motor, see the exhaust power valve and everything, and just get an idea how your motor is wearing in. So these are the new parts we got. It's from this company Raven. We got them on Rocky Mountain ATV MC. And again, very inexpensive parts, just a few bucks for the springs and O-rings. Really nice, cheap insurance to get your pipe on there well and to prevent any exhaust leaks. These springs are also really nice. They rotate around, so it's easy to clock them on the little hangers. So we got the lower one on. The upper one's a bit challenging because it's sandwiched right between the frame rail and the engine. So you might need to bend the little spring hook a little bit to make it easier to fit in there. And now we swapped over to the new rings. And before we slide the pipe into the head, we're just going to use a little bit of general purpose grease and lubricate those up. Make sure we don't tear them when we install them. And there you can get a good look at the inside of the motor. And it's good to see it's looking pretty clean in there. And you see we got both the springs ready to go. You just got to slip the pipe right on. So take your time, line up all the rubber mounts, the two rubber mounts and the exhaust port, and wiggle it around. It should slide in without any issue at all. It should slide in really easily. Some people also like to put some RTV on top of the O-rings for extra sealing. We're not going to get too crazy. The RTV kind of glues everything together and makes it harder to work on in the future. So if there's a slight exhaust leak, it's not the end of the world. We'd rather have it more serviceable. And now we're going to loosely install all the rubber mounts, starting with the lower one. Then the upper one under the gas tank. And then we're going to slip on our silencer to help align the rear of the pipe. And then we can get to tightening everything down. It also helps to move your Kickstarter out of the way. Get a little bit more room in there if you need it. So now we cleaned up our silencer a bit. We cleaned up the rubber seal, and we're going to carefully put it on there, put it onto the pipe, while aligning the 2 bolts on the frame for the silencer. Again, pretty easy stuff, but the only thing I would say about this is just leave everything loose until you have all the components on there, and that'll help align everything as best as possible. And there's no real torque values for this stuff, just hand tight anywhere where there's a nut or something like that, and you could use a nylock. That always helps to keep things from vibrating off, as opposed to a regular nut. So now we got everything tightened up as far as the bolts, and last thing, we're going to pop the springs onto the pipe. And we're using the same method, small vice grip. Just tighten it up quite a bit because you definitely don't want these springs flying. Also, if you're not used to doing this, it's a good idea to wear safety glasses just in case these springs pop off. But they went on pretty easy, as you see. Everything's nice and nice and aligned on there now. And then we're just going to go through and give the bolts a final tightening on the mounts. And then we just need to put the side cover back on and we should be all good to go. Again, these are 6mm threads, so just a tiny amount of torque. Don't go crazy on them. And back here on the silencer, like we mentioned, we're using nylock nuts. These are some of the bolts that typically will vibrate off very quickly if you use normal hardware. So we like to use nylock whenever possible. Again, just snug them up. Don't have to go crazy. These are rubber mounted, so you don't want to torque them too crazy and deform the rubber. And you also want the silencer and the pipe to be able to move in case you drop the bike and stuff can shift around a little bit without bending. And the last step is to put back the side panel. It's a little bit tricky with the seat still on there. You have to wiggle it under the radiator shroud and align everything up, but snaps in pretty easily. And the shroud just has 2 bolts, one at the bottom that goes to the subframe, and the one at the top that goes to the seat. Get those threaded in there, and then just snug them up like everything else, and you're all set.